Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. Today I wanted to talk about OpenAI's new deep research product. This is something that's quite different than their operator, which I found very much underwhelming. And of course, I've recently tested their O3 Mini and O3 Mini High. They're terribly named products. But today I wanted to talk about deep research, which I think will prove to be quite the game changer. Although at this point, it is very difficult to use because I think that OpenAI is being a little bit overwhelmed. So anyway, introducing deep research. This was from a couple of days ago, and it's taken a long time to go through this. Normally, you know that I do these tests, like when I test out the product, I do it kind of in front of you and I show how it's thinking and stuff. Not the way I'm going to be able to test this. I had to use this on and off in the background for the better part of the day to try to get it to actually run a few of these deep research projects. It has been completely bogged down. It's been very frustrating to use, so I have to admit that to start with. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, but I can start to see inklings, and when they get this kind of ironed out and they actually have the bandwidth to be able to do inference for the group of people that are interested. By the way, this is only available for the $200 a month subscribers. I have a feeling OpenAI may open up a more expensive $500 or $1,000 or $2,000 a month subscription tier, because at this point it looks like their services are being overwhelmed and $200 a month is probably not enough to reduce demand. So at this point, I'm going to cross my fingers. I'm happy that I'm able to use it right now for a mere $200 a month. So it's not cheap, but it's very cool when I'm actually able to use it, with several caveats. So like I said, the number one caveat is just the fact that it's basically unavailable. I've been trying to use it all day. I tried to use it last night. It doesn't work. It just gets stuck. In fact, let me go take a look right here. Yep, waiting. So I've been trying to get it to do something for me, this project for me, for about actuators and stuff. I thought for Scott Walter, I would do one on actuators. And I was very curious about what the latest is, from all these different robotics companies and stuff. But I have tried many, many times to get this thing to operate. I've got a whole bunch of different conversations where I've sort of started it over. So it's basically not working. Now we're going to sort of push that aside and assume that that stuff is going to get worked out, and talk about this, the reason why it's important and the reason why it is the future of AI, and the reason why people say that this is the beginning of the significant hockey stick moment. The number one reason is they built this on their O3 model. So thus far we have seen their O1 model, which was the first reasoning model, which would actually think about things. Of course, R1 came out, the DeepSeek R1, and has significantly challenged OpenAI. And so OpenAI, of course, had to recast things and revamp things. And so, of course, in response to that, OpenAI released their O3 Mini and O3 Mini High, which apparently give you a full access to the actual rationale that's going on, rather than what O1 did, which was just sort of a summary, which was less than stellar. So anyway, we did get that, but that did not give us access to their O3 model, the really big model, the big boy model, as opposed to the mini models. But it looks like OpenAI's deep research actually does give us access to their O3 model, the full model. So this is the first, kind of insight that we have into how their O3 model will work. And from the couple of examples that I've been able to eke out today, it looks like it's actually really very cool, but it doesn't present things quite as well as I wish it would. So we'll take a look at all of that. So we'll start with what it is, and this is from OpenAI's press release, and of course I'll leave a link to this down in the description. Deep Research is OpenAI's next agent that can do work for you independently. You give it a prompt and ChatGPT will find, analyze, and synthesize hundreds of online sources to create a comprehensive report at the level of a research analyst. And yeah, it can actually do papers that are fairly sophisticated here. Powered by a version of the upcoming OpenAI O3 model, so this is what I was talking about, that's optimized for web browsing and data analysis. It leverages reasoning to search, interpret, and analyze massive amounts of text, images, and PDFs on the internet, pivoting as needed in reaction to information it encounters. So basically, it is a full-fledged agent. You say what you want, and then it asks you a whole bunch of questions. It's rather annoying, actually. It asks you so many questions that it actually kind of takes you out of the flow because you have to answer the questions, but they're good questions. So I don't deny the fact that OpenAI needs to do this, so that this agent that might go spend 10 or 20 20 or 30 minutes researching something for you is not wasting its time. So it makes sense why they do this, but it is rather annoying the number of questions it asks before it starts. But anyway, again, I'll give them that because they don't want to be wasting their time or compute cycles or whatever. But once it gets going, and assuming it actually starts to work and doesn't break, you get some really interesting insights. It does a lot of research. It'll search dozens of sources and find the best sources. It will do everything from, I asked it to scour the internet and find me the best replacement for my Sony a7 III that I'm using currently. I don't know that I'll use it, but I was like, that sounds like a good thing, right? What would I want to spend my $3,000 to $5,000 on if I wanted to upgrade my camera setup for my studio? And of course, then I also asked it about robot actuators. I did that for Scott, like I said, and for my own interest. I haven't gotten an answer from that yet. I did a couple of things that I can't talk about because they're more private business related stuff, and I was able to eke that stuff out. But then to give it a real challenge, a real scientific challenge, I asked it about the latest theories about time as an emergent property of the universe rather than an intrinsic Einsteinian sort of property of the universe. In other words, space-time versus time as an emergent phenomenon. I wanted to see how it would do with something that, I would consider to be a rather sophisticated physics-based paper that should take account of things that have been written in the last 20 or 25 years or so. So even though it was difficult for me to do this because it was broken and it wasn't working a lot, I was able to get a range of different reports. And so I think I've got, at least some insight on this. So again, before we look at the results, we'll go a little bit deeper into their press release, which of course is very light on details. Anyway, Deep Research is built for people who do intensive knowledge work in areas like finance, science, policy, and engineering and need thorough, precise, and reliable research. It's also good for shoppers, etc. So, basically, if you need it to do deep research, if it's something that might take you hours or days to do yourself, this is a great way to do, as Dave Shapiro calls it, cognitive offloading, to get rid of some of the work that you would have to do, some of the brain cycles that you would have to expend to do anything from shop for a new camera to learning about Stephen Wolfram's hypergraph update version of emergent time in physics. So, anything in between those things, biology, medicine, you name it, you could get the kind of information you want, and anything that's available on the internet that you can scour the internet for, it can find for you. So it's really, really cool. So how does it work in more detail? Deep Research independently discovers, reasons about, and consolidates insights from across the web. To accomplish this, it was trained on real-world tasks requiring browser and Python tool use. So in other words, it's able to browse the web. It can also write Python code and I guess execute it as well, using the same reinforcement learning methods behind OpenAI o1, our first reasoning model. So reinforcement learning, if you happen to have watched my videos on R1 and R10, definitely check those out up here. I'll leave them at the end of the video as well. But anyway, same basic idea, reinforcement learning to allow their O1 and now their O3 model to reason about the world, to think about the world in a reasoning way. And it can use tools like browsing the web and Python. As they say here, while O1 demonstrates impressive capabilities in coding, math, and other technical domains, many real-world challenges demand extensive context and information gathering from diverse online sources. Deep Research builds on these reasoning capabilities to bridge that gap, allowing it to take on the types of problems people face in work and everyday life. So in other words, it's an actual agent. It's actually something that you can say, go do this task for me, and it can be a multi-step task, and you want a report at the end. You don't care particularly about the details. You just want it to go out and do this stuff. That is agentic behavior. You're not having to give it instructions every step of the way and hold its hand. You're like, go do this for me, and it goes and does it for you. As for how it was trained, Deep Research was trained using end-to-end reinforcement learning on hard browsing and reasoning tasks across a range of domains. So how they got that information, how they got the requests and the answers and stuff. Good question. That's something they're not telling us about. But anyway, obviously it wasn't easy to collect this data to train it on, but they've done that. Through that training, it learned to plan and execute a multi-step trajectory. In other words, it's agentic, it's behaving on its own, to find the data it needs, backtracking and reacting to real-time information where necessary. The model is also able to browse over user-uploaded files, plot and iterate on graphs using the Python tool, and embed both generated graphs and images from websites in its responses and cite specific sentences or passages from its sources. So it's able to act as a research assistant. I mean, that's basically what a research assistant would do these days. They would go online, they would find the best sources, they would read them, they would extract the good passages, they would put together a report for you in the fashion that you wanted. Do you want it academic? Do you want kind of a high-level executive summary? Whatever you're interested in, it will give you that formatted output with tables, with graphs, etc. And then for fun, let's take a look at Humanity's Last Exam, which used to be called Humanity's Last Stand. In other words, it's supposed to be like the hardest test that humans have ever come up with, and potentially it's the hardest thing we will ever come up with, and the next version of this will actually be an AI-generated version of this exam. Anyway, I haven't really looked at the questions, but I know they're very, very difficult. So you can see the accuracy percentage. GPT-4o, which was state-of-the-art not that long ago, got 3.3% accuracy on this exam. So just kind of pathetic, right? You know, it's like almost chance at that point if it's 3%. You can then see here that OpenAI's O1, which is relatively recent, just a few months old, got 9.1%. So that's a 3x improvement. That's very, very nice, but still single digits. You can also see that DeepSeek R1 only got a 9.4, and that is not multimodal. It was on text only subset. But anyway, it's on the order of the same performance as OpenAI's O1. And then of course you can see that OpenAI's recent releases O3 Mini and O3 Mini High got 10.5% and 13% respectively. But then OpenAI's Deep Research gets 26.6%. In other words, it doubles the best score that was there a couple of days ago. Now, does it have access to Google and to tools and things like that? Yes. This is something that these other models don't necessarily have access to, so it does give it a leg up, but we're talking about going from 3%, 6 months ago or something? Actually, even less than that. I mean, GPT-4o was state-of-the-art in like September, October, right? I think that O1 came out in like November, if I'm remembering correctly. So not that long ago, state-of-the-art was 3%. We're now at a quarter. We're over a quarter of the way to acing this exam. What is another 6 months or a year going to give us? I don't know, but you know, once this thing accomplishes on the order of 80 or 90% on Humanity's Last Exam, people are actually kind of running out of ideas of how to test these things anymore. So that's the kind of like just wall we're hitting at this point. It's just a hockey stick. It's just going up like crazy. And these models, because they're reinforcement learning based, are able to continue to self-improve because you can actually ask these models to write up documentation on how to improve themselves. They can then take that documentation and figure out how to make themselves better. And once AI can make itself better, then it can make everything else better because, of course, the smarter the AI is, the more it's able to do deep research in other areas as well. So we're looking at a crazy moment in history right now. So with that being said, let's take a look at some results here. And like I said, it's been challenging to get these results. The number one thing you need to do is press this deep research button down here and turn it a blue color. I told it a bunch of details, and you can pause the video. I'm not going to read all of this because it is a lot. But anyway, I give it a lot of details about a camera, what I'm using it for, what I want out of it, etc. And I said what I'm using right now, which is an A7 III. So this isn't the most deep thing in the world, but it is something I could spend days going down a rabbit hole trying to figure out what the best camera was. Second guessing myself, going like, oh, what about this? What about this, right? So this is something, if it can do it in a half an hour and it can save me that cognitive load and it can give me a good recommendation, this is fantastic. Even though it's not like earth shattering, it could make a difference to me. If I'm going to spend $3,000 or $5,000, I want to spend my money wisely, right? So anyway, then what it did was, like I said, the first thing it does is ask a whole bunch of questions. So I did ask it about a teleprompter as well. By the way, if anybody knows, I would love a teleprompter for my iPhone for like this, where I could actually put people's video on here. Like basically mirror the iPhone so I can see it and look at them when I'm talking. Otherwise, I'm usually looking off to the side, which seems to put people off. But anyway, aside from that, we're looking, it asks questions about budget range, shooting resolution, frame rate, current lighting setup, all of that kind of stuff. I give it the answer, then more questions, autofocus priority, preferred lens type, studio lighting setup, etc. And then I answered those questions, and then it had more questions for me. So like I said, it is very, very pedantic about asking for a lot of questions. Again, I can understand why they're about to expend a huge number of tokens and compute cycles, so they want to make sure it's right, but it is a little bit annoying before you get there. Anyway, so I gave that more answers, and so now it said I'm going to research top 5 cameras, best lens choices, comparison table, etc. I'll update you when I have the details. So here's where, it kind of like just sat there, and I would wait for like 10 minutes, and then it's like, okay, well, whatever. And so eventually I just said, hello, or are you working on it or something? And it finally got going, and then it finally did this. Now, this was like, I think the third web browser I opened with the same question, kind of was copying, pasting by the end. So the answers might not perfectly match up with the questions anymore. But by the time I finally got it working, it spent 17 minutes, looking through all of this stuff. And unfortunately, when it comes up with the answer, you can't see the thinking over here. So it's kind of gone, which is unfortunate, but I did get some screen grabs to show you for another one. But anyway, when it gets done, you can see it produces a pretty nice result here. And it says the A7, the Alpha A7 IV, and we've got the Canon EOS R6 Mark II. We've got the Sony A7S III, good recommendation. And then the classic Panasonic Lumix S5 II. So yeah, so those are the choices. It gives a chart about all of this with approximate price, lens details, all of this stuff with sources that you can go to. So you can actually look at the sources if you're interested. And then some teleprompter solutions as well that I didn't find as useful, but still relatively nice to see this. Then of course we get a kind of generic response. And I said, hey, give me a recommendation. I want the best camera lens in your opinion, plus the best teleprompter solution. So it didn't demur. It was like, okay, here's my recommendation, which is likely what I would pick because I've got the Sony A7 III. So it's like, well, getting the A7 IV makes perfectly good sense. Plus I can use the lens that I currently have on that. So that would make really good sense to do that. Or I could upgrade the lens to the 24-70 that it recommends here as well. So it gave me a rationale for that and the best teleprompter solution, which again, I didn't find as good because I really want a software solution more than a hardware solution. And I was trying to find a hardware one. I've already got a teleprompter. I've got the mirror and all that stuff. I just want something where I can run video on my phone. But regardless, this actually produced something that is very useful to me and, saved a lot of time. And I think it came up with the right answer. I have a general sort of sense that the Lumix or the Sony would be the two best solutions for really, really active autofocus in a studio lighting situation. Those seem to be the correct choices. And so I was very pleased to see that this reinforced my opinion about that. Now, the big caveat that I was talking about, and is even more egregious with the scientific paper that I had it work on, is there's no real way to get this out of ChatGPT and into a document. There's no way to print a PDF that looks attractive. And if you copy it, it sort of doesn't copy the formatting properly. The table doesn't look good. And so it's really, really substandard. So this is the big caveat I wanted to pass on to OpenAI. It's like, you guys need, an export feature. You need something. And I know there's this share up here, but that's like share a link. That doesn't actually like print out a copy. I want something where I can actually print it to PDF, save it to a Word document, print it as a LaTeX document, whatever. That's pretty necessary. If you're going to have a product like this, it needs to be able to produce professional output. And I know there is this thing called Canvas, but when I try to edit in Canvas, it won't let me do that because it says that the document is too long for Canvas. So if you're going to use Canvas as your primary interface for creating more pretty attractive documents and exporting them, then you better darn well make the canvas bigger so you can actually edit these documents there. But I would say at least a basic PDF export would be really, really important. You need to be able to have this formatted properly. You can't just have garbage text all over the place if you try to export it. So that's super annoying because you've got this beautiful thing, but you can't export it and you can't share it with other people. So speaking of broken, you can see here that I wanted, to ask it about actuators. And remember at the beginning of this video, which was now about 27 minutes ago, it's still waiting. It just sits there and either eventually it will break and just stop working entirely. And I'll have to ask something like, I'll be like, are you working? And see, like, yeah, just not really getting much of a response. It's definitely been broken. And I think, again, it's because it's overwhelmed, but it is a frustrating experience that you're not able to actually get a response rapidly enough. But let's take a look at one of these that actually worked well, which was, I want the latest research into the question of whether time is an emergent phenomenon or intrinsic. Sources should be of the highest quality. The question of whether Einstein's theory that space and time are sort of intrinsic fabric is correct, or whether some other means of creating the macroscopic reality we experience is closer to the truth of the universe is what I'm after here. Be sure your summary is formatted like a high quality journal article with graphs and tables as needed. Thanks. So anyway, I'm super fascinated by this topic, and I was like, well, let's go ahead and let the researcher figure this out. Let deep research do this. Again, I don't have this clicked right now, but I did, of course, before I, submitted the whole thing. And of course, I have a lot of familiarity with this topic because it really fascinates me. So I've spent a lot of time researching it. I wanted to see what this would come up with. It actually came up with one theory that I had not heard of before. So that was actually really cool. I was able to learn some stuff. But anyway, you could see the first thing it did was, asked a bunch of questions. I answered the questions, asked more questions, and then it asked me how familiar I was. I'm like, I'm good. You can go in as much depth as you want. So it was able to, slowly get through all the questions that it had, more questions. So, and then it said it's going to print all this stuff out, and then it stalled. It didn't do anything for the longest time. So, I would kind of prompt it. I'd be like, thanks, are you working? Let me know when you start the research, etc. Eventually it kicked over. This was, again, I think I had to open this up 3 times in 3 different web browsers and start over again. And then finally it was able to do that. It was able to do this in 8 minutes, which I find pretty remarkable considering that it's a fairly complex topic. But, it went off and spent time that would have taken me a full day of research. That I guess, 8 to 10 hours it would have taken me to gather all these sources and put this together. And that's not even counting writing it up in some sort of reasonable format. So you could maybe even consider it 2 days if I wanted to write it up decently well. So as it works, and unfortunately, like I said, once it gets done, it sort of buries this and you can't see it anymore. So I just did some screen grabs. You can see here, let me know when you start doing the research, and it starts doing it. And there's like a progress bar that goes across, and over on the right-hand side, there's sources and activity. And you can see, exploring recent contributions in string theory, identifying relevant sources, searching for all of this stuff. So it goes through this. You can see there's 18 sources at this point, up to 28 sources at this point. It looks at like citing particular lines out of individual papers. So it's really cool. You can actually see the process of it going through and analyzing this stuff. At this point, it's looking at Wolfram Alpha and Wolfram Physics to look into the hypergraph version of the universe that Wolfram has been promoting for the last decade or so at this point. And then it continues on building the writing plan. So it moves from research, and it had 28 sources here, to figuring out how to write up the final documentation. And so when it finally gets there, it produces this paper where you can see there's an abstract. It goes through the different possibilities. There's an introduction, general relativity, second law of thermodynamics, emergence, all that kind of stuff. So again, if you want me to, I can try to put this in the description, but the problem is, like I said, you can't really print this. If you try to print it out, it ends up being a garbled mess. So it's great inside of this, but you can't really export it, which is very, very frustrating. So that's a big caveat to deep research. It's not that useful at this point because you can't share it easily. You'd have to sort of copy and paste it by pieces and reformat the whole thing, and that would be a pain in the butt, especially when you get to things like this, where you have equations and stuff. And actually, there's some things like this, like mu and nu / it doesn't even format those properly anyway. But this equation is a complete disaster if you try to export it and stuff. So anyway, it should at the very least print to PDF and create LaTeX documents that are markup documents with the LaTeX formatting. I mean, that seems like the basics of being able to do export. But anyway, so you can see that it does it. It's, you've got thermodynamic arrow of time, emergent direction, quantum gravity. Let's see, what else do we have? String theory and holography, computation and novel approaches. So this would be Wolfram stuff. And then you eventually get to, and I did want to have experimental constraints and falsifiability. I want theories that at least have some degree of falsifiability, or else it's just sort of magic, right? Otherwise it's alchemy or something. But anyway, so it goes through all of this stuff and then eventually creates this table where you can see there's GR, general relativity, there's thermodynamics, goes through fundamental, key features, key predictions, falsifiability, etc. And you can see that most of them these days actually consider that time is more emergent than it is intrinsic, whereas certainly GR, general relativity, assumes that it's intrinsic. Most of the rest of them consider it to be emergent or mixed with string theory and holography. So anyway, it goes through that, and then we get to eventually a conclusion here. And then of course we get to the ubiquitous sources with links, so you can actually go and check the sources out. So I would consider this to be a really good, kind of graduate level summary paper. Now, it's not discovering any new science science. It's not making any predictions about science. It's just kind of going through and summarizing what other people have done. But if you were going to be researching in this area and you wanted to catch up quickly and go like, okay, I need the latest about this so I can see what my theory is and how it stands versus the rest of these, this is a huge time saver. This is something either you're going to have to hope somebody else already did this for you, or you're going to have to spend days working on this to put this all together for yourself. And this did this in 8 minutes. That is crazy. It did the research, the formatting, and the writing in 8 minutes. That is nuts. So with the caveat that this is completely overwhelmed, and sorry, Scott, it's still waiting. If this eventually does produce something about these actuators, I will actually pass it on to you because I'm interested myself. But anyway, with the caveat that it's completely overwhelmed and not working very well right now, and a really big caveat that you can't, as far as I can tell, export this in any kind of reasonably formatted document at this point, the deep research project itself is really pretty remarkable. Is this the game changer people are talking about on the internet? I don't think it's quite as big as some of the hype that people are talking about, but this is a true game changer in terms of productivity elevation. This is the same kind of thing where talking to a chatbot really can help you to discover something really rapidly in the creative space and can help you with coding and stuff. With this, you can start to take on larger tasks and you can actually give up more of your autonomy. You can delegate more to an entity like this, and it can go out and do significant tasks rather than writing you a piece of code that can operate. It looks like something like this could potentially write you an entire software suite, right? It can write you something with multiple different files with a main function that then accesses a bunch of sub files, with really thinking about how to do a more sophisticated engineering project on its own. Or it could do scientific research like this, or it can go shopping for you. So whatever you're interested in, if it involves Python or scraping the web or doing research on the web, I think that deep research is going to be a true game changer. Is it enough to change the world just yet? I don't quite think so. I don't think it's good enough to discover new science and new AI research on its own yet. But what is '04 going to look like? I mean, we're talking about '03, and '03 was only 3 to 4 months after '01. If '04 comes out by summer, like May or June or something, and it's another leap that's this much above '03, then the sky is the limit at that point. Eventually, this AI stuff is going to start to research itself, and it's going to figure out how to make itself better, not just in a sort of training sort of manner like it does right now, a recent reinforcement learning manner, but in a more explicit, directed manner where it's actually doing its own research and figuring it out on its own. And at that point, things get really crazy. All right, everybody, what do you think about this? Have you used deep research yourself? Have you been able to make it function? Definitely let me know in the comments. While you're down there, if you don't mind liking and subscribing, both of those really help out the channel, and I greatly appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.